Sometimes the people who hurt you the most don't come with a warning. They come with a hug, a smile, a family photo from 20 years ago. They ask how you've been right after draining your energy. They say, "I love you," right before crossing your boundaries. Again. And you let it slide. Not because you're weak, but because you were raised to confuse love with endurance, to tolerate discomfort in the name of family, to stay silent in the name of keeping the peace, to accept pain and call it love. But here's the Stoic truth: being a good person does not mean being a doormat, and unconditional love should never mean unconditional tolerance. Some behaviors cross the line, even when they come from the people you care about most, even when they share your blood. You are not here to absorb mistreatment just because it wears the mask of affection. Epictetus once said, "You are not harmed by what others do. You are harmed when you allow it to continue." And that quote might sting, because deep down many of us have allowed more than we should. But awareness is the beginning of transformation. So if you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling smaller, quieter, or like you're slowly disappearing from your own life, this video is for you. Because we're not here to learn how to endure more. We're here to learn how to draw the line with wisdom and love. It never starts with a shout. It begins with a sigh, a raised eyebrow, a passing comment like, "You're wearing that again," or "You really think that's a good idea?" One remark, here another tomorrow, then one next week, until eventually you pause before speaking. You filter your thoughts in real time. Not because you're unsure, but because someone has quietly trained you to believe you are always slightly wrong. This isn't feedback, it's erosion. There's a difference between being helped and being chipped away at. Constructive feedback is focused, kind, and aimed at what you do. It's rooted in care designed to help you grow. It says, "I believe in you, so here's what could be better." Constant criticism, on the other hand, is vague, repetitive, and deeply personal. It's not about your ideas or your work. It's about you, your worth, your capability, your identity. You don't always hear it in the words. You feel it in the tone, in your gut. And no matter how polite the delivery sounds, you don't leave the conversation sharpened. You leave shrunk. In families, this kind of criticism often comes wrapped in comparison. Your cousin already owns a house. Your sister never talks back. In romantic relationships, it's coded in sarcasm. "Relax, I'm just being honest. You're too sensitive." In the workplace, it's hidden behind fake perfectionism. "You did great, but next time maybe don't. Good job. Still, I wish you were more like..." And here's the dangerous part. The more familiar it becomes, the more you start to normalize the ache. You stop noticing how heavy it feels. You stop questioning why you're walking on eggshells. You slowly begin to edit yourself, not to grow, but just to survive in the relationship. The Stoics had a simple but powerful principle. What you allow, you teach. Epictetus. Let that sink in. Every time you stay silent after being diminished, you're not just absorbing pain, you're unintentionally training others to keep crossing the line. And over time, the cost is greater than hurt feelings. You lose touch with your inner voice. The one that says, "I know who I am. I know I have value. I know I'm allowed to exist without explanation." And without that voice, you drift. You begin to rely on others to define who you are. And that's where the danger becomes spiritual, not just emotional. So what can you do? You start by recognizing the signals. That tightness in your chest after a harmless remark. That fatigue after certain conversations. That subtle way your shoulders hunch. Just a little more every time you're around them. These aren't overreactions. They're warnings from your body, from your intuition, from your soul. And your job is not to argue, not to scream, not to defend. Your job is to draw a line with calm, with clarity, and with conviction. You can say it simply, "That felt like criticism, not care," and then watch. Watch who steps back and reflects, and who immediately lashes out, plays victim, or gaslights your reaction. Because in that moment, you're not just exposing them, you're reclaiming you. So let me ask you, have you been calling this kind of treatment feedback when it's really been eroding your self-worth? Have you stayed quiet not out of peace, but out of learned silence? And if so, what would it feel like to finally say, that's enough? Not out of anger, but out of self-respect, because you deserve relationships that help you rise, not ones that slowly, quietly make you forget how tall you really are. It always starts small. A late-night call you didn't ask for, an unsolicited opinion about your life, someone borrowing your time, your energy, your space, without ever asking if you're okay with it. You brush it off. You tell yourself it's not that big of a deal, and maybe in isolation it isn't. But over time you feel it, that quiet whisper inside, this isn't okay, and yet you silence it because it's your parent or your partner or someone who says, I love you. And this is where it gets tricky, because we're taught to believe that love excuses behavior, that if someone means well, we shouldn't draw lines, that if they're close to us, they're entitled to access us. But here's the truth no one tells you. Love without respect is not love, it's possession. I once knew a man who lived with a quiet tension every week. His mother had a spare key to his apartment, and without warning she would show up, walk in, rearrange furniture, comment on his groceries. Sometimes she'd open his mail. When he finally said, Mom, I'd appreciate if you called before coming over, she smiled and replied, I'm your mother. I don't need permission. That moment stayed with him, not because she yelled, but because of what she revealed. She didn't see him as a sovereign adult, but as an extension of herself. And that's what boundary violations often look like. Not always explosive, not always cruel, but quiet, consistent, and deeply entitled. Now, to be fair, some people cross boundaries because they've never been taught what boundaries are. They come from families where closeness meant control, where privacy was seen as rejection, where love equaled unlimited access. But others, they know exactly what they're doing. They don't storm through your limits, they test them. They lean in just enough. They apologize just enough. They twist your empathy into guilt until you become a yes machine just to keep the peace. And when you finally say no, they respond with something like, wow, you've changed. But what they really mean is, you've stopped letting me control you. Here's the Stoic truth. Boundaries are not about pushing people away. They're about protecting what's worth keeping close, your peace, your energy, your soul. Marcus Aurelius once said, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts, but I believe it also becomes dyed with the people you allow in without filter. So how do you respond? You start by shifting the energy, not with a speech, not with an argument, but with a simple, direct sentence. Please don't come over without calling. I'm not comfortable discussing that. I'm not available right now. No long explanation, no nervous laughter, no apology, just clarity. And then the most important part, follow through, because a boundary without consequences is just a suggestion. If they keep crossing the line after you've been clear, you don't owe them more chances. You owe yourself action. Limit the time, shift the dynamic, and if needed, walk away completely. That's not cruelty, that's discipline. Because Stoic strength isn't about building walls, it's about drawing lines with conviction and having the courage to stand by them. So here's a question worth sitting with. Have you been calling it closeness when it's actually control? Have you convinced yourself to tolerate discomfort because saying something would make them uncomfortable? And if so, what would it look like to choose yourself again, not to punish, not to distance, but to finally protect your inner peace like it matters, because it does. Not all wounds bleed. Some of the deepest ones leave no bruises, no scars, They don't scream, they whisper, and they start with something as subtle as a sentence. "I never said that. You're imagining things. God, you're so sensitive, you try to brush it off. But something doesn't feel right. You walk away from the conversation, confused, not angry, but off balance. Like you lost an argument you didn't even know you were in. And over time, that feeling grows. You start questioning your memory. You ask yourself, am I overreacting? Did I really hear it wrong? Maybe I am the problem, but you're not. You're being manipulated slowly, quietly, and strategically. And it has a name: gaslighting. Gaslighting doesn't attack you from the outside. It dismantles you from within. It makes you doubt your emotions, your perceptions, your truth. You begin to second-guess the gut feelings you once trusted. The stories you once told with clarity now come with hesitation. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens moment by moment. A slight change in their tone. A denial of what you both know happened. A joke that wasn't a joke. Until one day you stop defending yourself, not because you're wrong, but because you've been trained to feel unsure. And that's the danger, because when your truth becomes negotiable, your reality becomes fragile. And when someone else gets to rewrite that reality, they don't just control the conversation, they start controlling you. Here's what Stoicism teaches us. If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. Epictetus. Now that doesn't mean the manipulation is your fault. It means this: your power begins the moment you stop letting them define the rules of the game. You don't win by arguing harder. You don't prove your memory through shouting matches. You don't need to convince the gaslighter, because they're not interested in clarity. They're interested in control. So what do? You don't engage. You observe. You start writing things down. What was said, how it made you feel, how they responded, not for revenge, not to weaponize, but to reclaim your clarity. You document your experience so you stop gaslighting yourself. And then you talk to someone you trust, not someone inside the toxic dynamic. Someone outside of it, a friend, a therapist, a mentor, someone who can look you in the eye and say, no, you're not crazy. That actually happened. Because sometimes the first step in healing is just having your reality validated. Now here's the hardest part. Set the boundary. You don't need a long explanation. You don't need to make a speech. You simply say, that conversation didn't feel respectful to me, or I'm not going to continue when I feel like I'm being dismissed. Then pause and step back. Not out of anger, but out of self-respect. Because gaslighting doesn't take your power all at once. It takes it in pieces, one subtle jab, one you're too emotional, one you misunderstood, until you begin to fade into someone you no longer recognize. But now you're seeing it, you're naming it, and in doing that, you're already breaking the spell. So here's your reminder. Your mind is your fortress. No one, no matter how charming, close, or charismatic, has the right to occupy it without permission. And the moment you choose to trust yourself again, you become someone no manipulator can touch. It usually doesn't start with a betrayal. It starts with a skipped detail, a story that changes just slightly, a promise repeated and forgotten again. At first, you give them the benefit of the doubt. You tell yourself, maybe I misheard, or maybe they're just stressed. But then it happens again and again, until you start collecting red flags like souvenirs, quietly, nervously wondering if it's all in your head. And one day you realize you haven't been building trust. You've been building a relationship on shifting sand. Chronic dishonesty doesn't shout. It erodes. And the worst part, it doesn't just destroy your trust in them. It slowly dismantles your trust in yourself. You start questioning your memory. You second-guess your reactions. You hesitate to confront because somewhere deep down you've been conditioned to ask, what if I'm just being too much? But you're not. You're seeing what's real. and you're feeling what most people try to ignore. Seneca once said, "Truth is the first lesson of friendship," because without truth, there is no relationship, only performance, only illusion. And the people who lie to you habitually, repeatedly, aren't protecting your feelings. They're protecting their convenience. They lie because the truth would cost them something: accountability effort, maybe even the image they've worked so hard to sell you. And dishonesty wears many masks: omission, what they choose not to say. Minimization, it's not a big deal. Deflection, why are you always so paranoid? Betrayal in disguise. Sweet words in front of you, broken integrity behind you. It doesn't matter which form it takes, the impact is the same. You lose your footing. You stop trusting your own judgment. And that isn't just emotional, it's neurological. Studies show that repeated exposure to deception weakens your brain's ability to assess truth and danger. It literally clouds your perception. That's not love, that's sabotage. So what does a Stoic do? We stop listening to words. We start watching behavior, because people lie with words, but the truth always leaks through their actions. Do they follow through? Do they circle back? Do they hold themselves accountable without you having to chase it? If not, then you don't need another conversation. You need a decision. The Stoic path isn't about emotional explosion. It's about emotional clarity. You don't need to scream. You need to observe. You need to document what you see. Write down the contradictions and re-anchor to your own truth, because for too long you've been anchoring to theirs. You also let the silence grow, not out of revenge, but out of respect for your own peace. Because here's the harsh truth: if someone repeatedly lies to you, they're already telling you without saying a word that your trust is disposable. Your peace is negotiable. Your clarity is optional. Your response must be final, not in anger, but in strength. Let me ask you this. Have you been telling yourself they're just confused when deep down you know they're just careful? Careful with what they share, careful with when they change their version of the truth. And if you're nodding even slightly, then maybe it's time to ask, what is all this uncertainty costing me? Because honesty isn't just about what they say to you. It's about what it allows you to feel inside yourself. Safe, steady, sane. So here's the Stoic response. Protect your clarity like it's sacred, because it is. You don't need to fix them. You need to free yourself from trying. You don't need to collect more evidence. You already know. And that knowing, that quiet, unshakable knowing, is where your power lives. Don't hand it over for one more "I'm sorry" that changes nothing. Because the person who lies to you with a smile will steal from you with silence. And the person who deceives you with calm words will unravel you one unspoken truth at a time. It usually starts with a laugh, a sarcastic remark, a funny comment that cuts just a little too deep, a jab in front of others that feels more like a punch when you're alone. And when you flinch, they shrug. Relax, it's just a joke. But your chest tightens anyway. Your smile feels forced, and somewhere inside you wonder, why does this hurt so much if it's supposed to be funny? Let me be clear, they weren't joking. They were testing how far they can go, testing what you'll tolerate, testing if they can hide harm inside humor. And when you laugh along just to keep the peace, you're not showing strength. You're showing them where the cracks are. One woman once said, "It wasn't the insults that broke me. It was 20 years of laughing along with things that secretly shattered me." Think about that. 20 years of smiling through disrespect, of clapping for your own humiliation because you didn't want to seem too sensitive. That's not humor. That's emotional erosion. Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest Stoic minds, once wrote, "Let your words be like a surgeon's scalpel, used to heal, not to wound." Real humor doesn't humiliate. Real connection doesn't require you to shrink for someone else's entertainment. So here's a question worth asking. If you're the punchline every time, is it still a joke or has it become something more sinister? The Stoic answer: stop laughing. Stop brushing it off. Stop handing out silent permission slips for people to cross your boundaries. When someone masks cruelty as comedy, you don't need to match their energy. You need to mirror your values. Say it calmly. Say it clearly. That's not funny to me. That doesn't feel respectful. And then, this is key, leave the awkward silence where it belongs with them. Don't rescue them from it, because every time you rescue someone from the discomfort of their own behavior, you inherit the pain they refuse to carry. Now I get it. These moments are uncomfortable, especially when it's family coworkers, old friends, people who say they love you but use humor like a weapon with a soft blade. But ask yourself, do I feel safe around them? Or do I walk on eggshells waiting for the next joke? Because love in its true form doesn't mock your insecurities. It doesn't minimize your pain for the sake of a laugh. And here's the truth most people avoid. If someone knows your weakness and still chooses to aim at it, they're not trying to connect. They're trying to control, through shame, through public embarrassment, through casual cruelty. And you can either keep pretending it's fine, or you can start protecting your peace. Let this be your turning point. The moment where you stop laughing to survive and start speaking to heal. The moment you stop being the audience to your own humiliation and start becoming the author of your self-respect. Because what you tolerate, you teach. And what you ignore, you inherit. So the next time someone says, lighten up, it was just a joke. Look them in the eye and ask, why does your idea of fun always come at my expense? If they stumble, fumble, or deflect, good. Let the discomfort grow, because the most stoic thing you can do is honor your worth without raising your voice. That's not weakness, that's mastery. Let's be honest, some of the deepest wounds you carry weren't caused by strangers, but by the people you loved, people you trusted, people who smiled, laughed, and even said, I'm just trying to help. But here's the truth: when criticism is constant, when your boundaries are ignored, when your emotions are twisted, when lies become routine, when jokes turn into weapons, that's not love. That's erosion. The pain is subtle. It doesn't scream, it whispers. You tell yourself, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe they didn't mean it that way. Maybe if I try a little harder. But day by day, your confidence starts to vanish. Your voice becomes quieter, and without realizing it, you begin to accept treatment that chips away at your spirit. Here's where Stoic wisdom becomes not just relevant, but essential. Epictetus once said, what you tolerate, you teach. Let that sink in. Every time you stay silent in the face of disrespect, you're not just enduring it, you're giving it permission. But here's the good news. You can revoke that permission right now, today. You don't need to justify it. You don't need their approval. You only need one thing: clarity. Clarity that your peace matters. Clarity that your energy is not a public utility. Clarity that respect is a requirement, not a luxury. Marcus Aurelius wrote, you don't have to tolerate everything. See things clearly, then act accordingly. This is your moment to do exactly that. So how do you begin? You begin with one truth you've been too afraid to say, one boundary you've been too scared to draw, one sentence you've rehearsed 100 times in your head but never spoken aloud. I don't find that funny. I'm not okay with this anymore. This isn't healthy for me. Say it. Even if your voice shakes, especially if your voice shakes. Because that trembling, that's your soul reclaiming its ground. Yes, it will be uncomfortable. Yes, some people won't like it. But here's the Stoic truth: you're not here to be liked. You're here to be aligned with your values, your peace, and your integrity. So if you're waiting for a sign, this is it. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Not everyone has earned a seat at your table. And not everyone should be allowed to speak into your life. You get to decide who enters your space. You get to choose who stays. And more importantly, you get to walk away from anything that teaches you to doubt your worth. Freedom doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it starts quietly, with a boundary, with a breath, with a no that you no longer apologize for. And in that moment, you don't just protect your peace. You begin building a life that respects you. And that is where healing begins.